Maria Santos grew up in a small mountain town where hunting was more than a hobby. It was survival. Her father, a former military man, taught her to shoot when she was barely 10 years old. While other girls her age played with dolls, Maria spent her afternoons in the woods learning to track deer and hit targets from impossible distances. The town people thought it was strange. A girl with a rifle? They whispered behind closed doors about how Maria's father was raising her wrong. She should be learning to cook and sew, the older women would say. What kind of life is this for a young lady? But Maria didn't care about their opinions. She had found her calling. By the time she turned 18, Maria could hit a tin can from 300 yards away without breaking a sweat. Her father had taught her everything he knew about wind direction, bullet drop, and breathing techniques. She understood the mechanics of different rifles better than most men twice her age. Yet when she announced her intention to join the military's elite sniper program, the laughter was loud and cruel. The recruitment office was filled with burly men who looked like they could crush rocks with their bare hands. When Maria walked, in wearing her simple civilian clothes, carrying her father's old hunting rifle, the room fell silent. Then came the snickers. "You lost, little girl?" asked a sergeant behind the desk. "The secretary's office is down the hall." The other recruits burst into laughter, slapping their knees and elbowing each other. Maria set her rifle case down with a soft thud and looked the sergeant straight in the eye. "I'm here to apply for the sniper program," she said calmly. The laughter grew louder. One recruit, a massive man with tattoos covering his arms, wiped tears from his eyes. "Did you hear that, boys? Princess here wants to be a sniper." He turned to Maria with a condescending smile. "Sweetheart, this isn't a game. Real snipers deal with life and death situations. Maybe you should try nursing instead." The sergeant looked Maria up and down, clearly skeptical. She was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Her hands looked too small to properly grip a military-grade rifle. Everything about her seemed wrong for the job. "Listen, miss," he said with barely concealed amusement. "The sniper program is extremely demanding. We're talking about months of intensive training in harsh conditions. You'll be crawling through mud, sleeping in freezing temperatures, and carrying equipment that weighs more than you do." Maria had expected this reaction. Growing up in a small town, she had faced doubt and dismissal her entire life. Every hunting, competition, every shooting match, every display of her skills had been met with the same surprised faces and condescending attitudes. She had learned to let her actions speak louder than words. "I understand the requirements," Maria replied evenly. "I've read every manual, studied every technique. I've been shooting since I was 10 years old, and I've never missed a target I intended to hit." The recruits exchanged amused glances. One of them leaned over to his buddy and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's been shooting squirrels in her backyard and thinks she's ready for combat." The sergeant sighed and pulled out a clipboard. The military had recently opened combat roles to women, and technically, he couldn't refuse her application based on gender alone. But he figured she'd wash out within the first week of training. Most male recruits couldn't handle the physical and mental demands of the program. A small-town girl would be going home with her tail between her legs before she knew what hit her. "Fine," he said, scribbling her name on a form. "But don't say, I didn't warn you. Training starts Monday at 500 hours. Bring everything on this equipment list." He handed her a paper that seemed to go on forever. Combat boots, tactical gear, camping equipment, and about 50 other items she'd never heard of. "And one more thing," he added with a smirk. "There are no participation trophies in this program. You either make the cut or you're gone." As Maria left the recruitment office, she could hear the men still chuckling behind her. "I give her 3 days, one said. 2 days, countered another. "She'll be crying for her mommy before the first week is over." Their words stung, but they also fueled something deep inside her. She had been underestimated her entire life, and every single time, she had proven the doubters wrong. That evening, Maria sat in her childhood bedroom, cleaning her father's rifle and preparing for the challenge ahead. Her mother knocked on the door and entered with a worried expression. "Are you sure about this, mija?" she asked softly. Those men, and they seem so harsh. Maybe there are other ways to serve your country." Maria looked up from her rifle and smiled. "Mama, I've been preparing for this my whole life. I know what I'm capable of even if they don't." Her father appeared in the doorway, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and concern. He had seen his daughter's determination before, but this was different. This was bigger than any hunting competition or local shooting match. This was about proving herself in a world that didn't want to make room for her. "Remember everything I taught you," he said quietly. "Trust your instincts, control your breathing, and never let them see you doubt yourself." Maria nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She knew the next few months would test every skill she had learned and every ounce of determination she possessed. The men at the recruitment office expected her to fail, and honestly, she wasn't sure she could prove them wrong, but she was going to try with everything she had. As she packed her gear that night, Maria thought about all the small-town girls who had dreams bigger than their circumstances. She thought about the women who had fought for the right to serve, in combat roles, facing ridicule and discrimination every step of the way. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they weren't strong enough, tough enough, or good enough to chase their dreams. Monday morning would come soon enough. The real test was about to begin. Monday morning arrived like a slap in the face. Maria stood in formation with 23 other recruits at exactly 0500 hours, her breath visible in the cold mountain air. The training facility looked like something from a war movie. Concrete, buildings surrounded by obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and terrain that seemed designed to break spirits. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez walked down the line of recruits like a predator sizing up his prey. He was a compact man with muscles that looked carved from stone and eyes that had seen too much combat. When he reached Maria, he stopped and stared down at her for what felt like an eternity. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on their way to cheerleading practice." The male recruits snickered, but Maria kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She had expected this. In fact, she had prepared for much worse. Rodriguez leaned in close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. "Let me guess, sweetheart. Daddy was a hunter and you think that makes you soldier material?" Maria didn't respond. "I asked you a question, recruit." "My father taught me to shoot, drill sergeant," Maria replied in a clear, steady voice. "But I'm here because I earned my place, not because of who my father is." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her composed response. Most recruits were shaking in their boots by now. "Is that so?" he said with a dangerous smile. "Well, then you won't mind demonstrating these skills for us, will you?" He gestured toward the shooting range in the distance. "Everyone grab your gear. We're starting with basic marksmanship. Let's see what our little mountain girl can really do." The group marched to the range, combat boots crunching on gravel. Maria noticed how the other recruits gave her a wide berth, as if her presence might somehow contaminate their chances of success. She could hear their whispered conversations. "This is embarrassing," one muttered. "They're letting anyone in." "These days," said another. Rodriguez set up the first challenge. Standard military targets at 200 yards. Not particularly difficult for someone with Maria's background, but far enough to separate the experienced shooters from the wannabes. "Each recruit gets 5 shots," he announced. "Anything less than perfect and you start the day with a 10-mile run through the mud course." One by one, the recruits took their positions. Some did well, clustering their shots near the center of the target. Others struggled with the military rifles, which were heavier and more powerful than anything they had used before. When it was Maria's turn, Rodriguez made a show of checking his watch. "Take your time, princess, we've got all day." Maria approached the firing line and examined the rifle she'd been assigned. It was a standard military sniper rifle, different from her father's hunting gun but familiar enough. She adjusted the scope, checked the wind direction by watching the flags, and settled into a prone position. The other recruits had shot quickly, eager to get the test over with. Maria took her time. "Any day now," Rodriguez called out, but Maria ignored him. She controlled her breathing just as her father had taught her, feeling her heartbeat slow down. The first shot rang out, followed by 4 more in quick succession. When the range officer checked her target through binoculars, his expression changed. 5 shots dead center, he called out. Perfect grouping. The other recruits fell silent. Rodriguez walked over to examine the target himself, his skeptical expression gradually shifting to one of grudging respect. The 5 bullet holes were clustered so tightly they could have been covered by a quarter. Lucky shots, muttered Jake Morrison, the biggest and loudest of the male recruits. He was a former college football player who had been talking nonstop about his hunting expeditions back home. Let's see her do it again from 400 yards. Rodriguez glanced at Morrison, then back at Maria. You heard the man. Think you can handle a real challenge? Maria simply nodded and moved to the 400-yard line. This was getting interesting. At this distance, wind conditions became much more important, and the slightest mistake would send a bullet wide of the mark. Maria took even more time with her second round of shots. She studied the wind flags, noted how the heat from the morning sun was creating small air currents, and adjusted her scope accordingly. The other recruits watched in growing amazement as she fired 5 more shots with the same methodical precision. Dead center again, the range officer announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Best grouping I've seen in 15 years of running this range. The smugness was beginning to drain from the faces of Maria's fellow recruits. Morrison looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Rodriguez studied Maria with new interest, his earlier mockery replaced by professional curiosity. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that? He asked. In the mountains back home, Maria answered simply. My father taught me that every shot counts. You don't get second chances when you're hunting for food. She paused, looking Rodriguez directly in the eye. And I imagine you don't get second chances in combat either. The drill sergeant nodded slowly. He had seen plenty of recruits who could shoot well on a controlled range, but fell apart under pressure. Still, this girl's skills were undeniable. All right, people, he called out to the group. Let's move on to physical training. We'll see how our sharpshooter handles the obstacle course. This was where Maria expected to struggle. She wasn't built like these men, with their broad shoulders and thick muscles. The obstacle course looked like medieval torture device. Rope climbs, wall scaling, mud crawls, and weighted carries that would challenge even experienced soldiers. Same rules apply, Rodriguez announced. Anyone who can't complete the course in regulation time gets to run it again and again until they get it right or wash out. He glanced pointedly at Maria. No special treatment for anyone. The first few recruits attacked the course with brute force, powering through obstacles with raw strength. Some succeeded, others failed spectacularly. When Maria's turn came, she approached the course differently. Where others used strength, she used technique and intelligence. She found the most efficient way to climb the rope, the smartest route through the maze, and the best body position for crawling under barbed wire. She wasn't the fastest recruit to complete the course, but she finished well within the time limit while using a fraction of the energy the others had burned. When she crossed the finish line, she wasn't even breathing hard. Rodriguez checked his stopwatch and shook his head in amazement. How? Asked Morrison, who had barely made the time limit and was now bent over trying to catch his breath. Physics, Maria replied matter-of-factly. Leverage momentum and efficiency. You don't have to be the strongest if you're the smartest. Several of the other recruits exchanged glances, beginning to realize that they might have underestimated this small town girl. As the day progressed through various training exercises, Maria continued to surprise everyone. She excelled at map reading and navigation, demonstrated advanced knowledge of ballistics and trajectory calculations, and showed remarkable composure under stress. By evening chow, the atmosphere in the barracks had changed completely. The recruits, who had been mocking her that morning, were now watching her with wary respect. Rodriguez pulled her aside after dinner. I'll be honest with you, Santos, he said quietly. I didn't think you'd last the day. But you've got skills I haven't seen in years of training recruits. He paused, studying her carefully. The question is, do you have what it takes when the pressure really starts building? Because tomorrow, we start the real training. The next 3 weeks transformed the training camp into Maria's proving ground. Every morning brought new challenges designed to break down recruits and separate the truly committed from those who were just playing soldier. Rodriguez had been right. The first day had been easy compared to what followed. Advanced camouflage training pushed everyone to their limits. Recruits had to remain perfectly still for hours while instructors tried to spot them using binoculars and thermal imaging. Equipment. Maria discovered that her smaller size was actually an advantage here. While the bigger men struggled to find hiding spots that could conceal their bulk, she could disappear into terrain that wouldn't hide a backpack. On the 4th day of camouflage exercises, Morrison cracked. He had been lying motionless in a pile of brush for 6 hours when a family of fire ants discovered his position. The big man jumped up screaming and swatting at himself, revealing his location to every instructor within a mile radius. As he ran around frantically trying to escape the stinging insects, Maria remained frozen in her own hiding spot just 20 feet away, even though ants were crawling over her boots. "Santos," Rodriguez called out after the exercise ended. "Front and center." Maria emerged from her concealment like a ghost materializing from the forest floor. Other recruits looked around in amazement. They had been searching for her position all afternoon without success. "How long were you watching Morrison's meltdown?" Rodriguez asked, with the hint of a smile. "The entire time, drill sergeant," Maria replied. "But my mission was to remain undetected, not to provide entertainment." Several recruits chuckled, and even Rodriguez couldn't hide his approval. Maria had learned the first rule of sniping. Mission comes first, everything else is secondary. The physical demands continued to escalate. Recruits had to carry 90-pound packs through 20-mile hikes in full combat gear. They practiced combat roles while carrying rifles, learned to climb cliffs with full equipment loads, and endured sleep deprivation exercises that pushed them beyond normal human endurance. Maria approached each challenge with the same methodical intelligence she had shown on the obstacle course. When others tried to muscle through problems, she found smarter solutions. During a particularly brutal night navigation exercise, while her fellow recruits crashed through the underbrush like wounded elephants, Maria moved silently through the forest using techniques her father had taught her for hunting deer. She arrived at the checkpoint first, barely winded, while others limped in hours later with torn uniforms and twisted ankles. "How?" gasped one recruit who had gotten lost 3 times and fallen into a stream. "It's like she can see in the dark." "I grew up in these mountains," Maria explained patiently. "You learn to read the terrain, feel the wind patterns, and move with the forest instead of fighting it." She wasn't trying to show off. She was simply using skills that had been second nature since childhood. But it wasn't just physical challenges that tested the recruits. Rodriguez introduced psychological warfare exercises designed to break down mental barriers and test decision-making under extreme pressure. Recruits were subjected to loud noises, flashing lights, and deliberately confusing orders while trying to complete complex tasks. During one particularly intense exercise, recruits had to disassemble and clean their rifles while instructors screamed contradictory commands and set off flashbang grenades nearby. Many of the men fumbled with their weapons, their hands shaking from stress and overstimulation. Maria closed her eyes and relied on muscle memory, her fingers finding each component of her rifle automatically, while her mind filtered out the chaos around her. "How are you doing that?" shouted David Chen, a recruit who had washed out of pilot training and was struggling with the noise and confusion. "My father used to make me clean rifles while he played loud music, and my brothers threw things at me," Maria replied without opening her eyes. "He said if you can't focus under pressure, you'll never survive when it really matters." Rodriguez watched this exchange with growing interest. He had been testing recruits for over a decade, and he recognized something special when he saw it. Maria wasn't just skilled, she was naturally suited for the mental aspects of sniping that broke most people. She could compartmentalize stress, maintain focus under pressure, and think clearly when others panicked. The breaking point for many recruits came during the mock combat scenarios. These exercises simulated real battlefield conditions, complete with smoke, explosions, and actors playing enemy combatants. Recruits had to make split-second decisions about when to shoot and when to hold fire, often with incomplete information and friendly forces in the area. Jake Morrison finally washed out during one of these exercises. Faced with a scenario where civilians were mixed in with hostile targets, he froze completely. For 30 crucial seconds, he couldn't pull the trigger, couldn't make a decision, couldn't function. "I can't do this," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of simulated gunfire. "I can't be responsible for making these kinds of choices." Rodriguez nodded with understanding rather than disappointment. "It takes a special kind of person to handle this responsibility," he told Morrison. "There's no shame in recognizing it's not for you." Morrison packed his gear that afternoon and left without saying goodbye to anyone. Maria watched him go with a mixture of sympathy and determination. She understood the weight of what they were training for. Every shot they fired in combat would be a life-or-death decision. Every mistake could cost innocent lives or get their fellow soldiers killed. It was a responsibility that kept her awake. Some nights, staring at the ceiling of the barracks and wondering if she was truly prepared for what lay ahead. But when morning came and training resumed, Maria threw herself into each exercise with renewed intensity. She practiced combat scenarios until she could identify targets and calculate firing solutions automatically. She studied ballistics tables until she could predict bullet trajectories in her sleep. She memorized enemy weapons, vehicles, and tactics until she could recognize threats from miles away. The other recruits began seeking her out for advice and assistance. Men who had mocked her just weeks earlier now asked for her help with shooting techniques and tactical problems. Maria shared her knowledge freely, understanding that in combat, everyone's survival might depend on everyone else's skills. "You're different," Chen told her one evening as they cleaned their rifles together. "Most people here are trying to prove how tough they are. You're just focused on getting better." Maria considered this observation carefully. She realized that while others were fighting to prove themselves to the instructors, she was fighting to prove herself to herself. By the end of the third week, the original group of 24 recruits had shrunk to 16. The dropouts included some of the biggest, loudest, most confident men who had joined the program. What remained was a core group of individuals who had discovered reserves of strength and determination they didn't know they possessed. Rodriguez gathered the survivors for what he called a progress evaluation. "You've made it through the basic phase," he announced. "But now comes the real test. Next week, we start advanced tactical training. This is where we separate the good shooters from the true snipers." His eyes swept across the group, lingering on Maria. "Some of you have surprised me. Others are performing exactly as expected. But everyone here has earned the right to continue." That night, Maria lay in her bunk thinking about how much had changed since that first day at the recruitment office. The men who had laughed at her were long gone, washed out or transferred to other programs. The recruits who remained treated her with respect earned through performance rather than demanded through intimidation. She thought about her father's words about trusting her instincts and never letting others see her doubt herself. So far, his advice had served her well. But she knew the hardest challenges were still ahead. Advanced tactical training began with a sobering reality check. The remaining 16 recruits were introduced to Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez, a combat veteran with 3 overseas deployments and confirmed kills that she never discussed publicly. Vasquez was the first female instructor most of the male recruits had encountered in the program, and her presence immediately changed the dynamic. "Forget everything you think you know about sniping," Vasquez announced on the first morning. "Hollywood, movies, video games, and war stories have filled your heads with nonsense. Real sniping is 90% patience, 9% calculation, and 1% pulling the trigger." She paced in front of the group like a predator studying prey. "Most of you will wash out in the next 2 weeks, not because you can't shoot, but because you can't handle the mental pressure of what we actually do." The first exercise was deceptively simple. Each recruit was given a target assignment and told to maintain surveillance on a mock enemy compound for 72 hours straight. They had to record every movement, identify patterns, and report intelligence while remaining completely undetected. The catch? The compound was staffed with experienced soldiers whose job was to find and eliminate any observers. Maria chose her position carefully, studying the terrain for hours before settling on a spot that provided excellent visibility while offering multiple escape routes. She had learned from her hunting experiences that the best hide wasn't necessarily the closest or most comfortable. It was the one that nobody else would think to check. Other recruits made rookie mistakes. Williams chose a position that offered a perfect view but left him silhouetted against the skyline. He was spotted and eliminated within 6 hours. Rodriguez picked a spot too close to the compound and was discovered by a patrol dog. One by one, recruits were identified and removed from the exercise. Maria remained in position for the full 72 hours, moving only when absolutely necessary, and then with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who understood that sudden motion catches the eye more than anything else. She cataloged every detail of the mock enemy's routine: guard changes, meal times, communication patterns, and vulnerabilities in their security perimeter. When the exercise ended, only 4 recruits remained undetected. Maria was not only among the survivors but had compiled the most comprehensive intelligence report of anyone. Vasquez studied her observations with professional interest. "Santos," she said, "this is graduate-level work. Where did you learn target analysis?" "From hunting, ma'am," Maria replied. "You have to understand an animal's behavior patterns if you want to predict where it will be. I assumed the same principles would apply to human targets." Vasquez nodded approvingly. The girl was thinking like a sniper, not just shooting like one. The psychological evaluations became more intense as training progressed. Recruits were subjected to stress interviews, ethical dilemmas, and scenarios designed to test their decision-making under extreme pressure. One exercise particularly disturbed several recruits. They were shown photographs of actual combat situations and asked to identify legitimate targets while operating under strict rules of engagement. During one session, Maria was presented with a photograph showing a street scene in an urban combat zone. Multiple figures were visible, some clearly hostile, others ambiguous. "You have 5 seconds to identify your target and explain your choice," Vasquez instructed. "Remember, innocent lives depend on your decision." Maria studied the image methodically. While other recruits had made quick decisions based on obvious visual cues, she noticed subtle details that others missed. "The man behind the blue car," she said confidently. "He's holding what appears to be a cell phone, but his body position and the way he's concealing himself suggest he's actually operating a remote detonator." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Explain your reasoning." Maria pointed to specific elements. In the photograph, the man's foot position, the angle of his shoulders, the way his supposedly casual stance actually provided cover and concealment. His behavior doesn't match someone making a phone call. Everything about his positioning suggests hostile intent. The evaluation proved Maria correct. The figure had indeed been identified as an enemy combatant, preparing to detonate an improvised explosive device. Other recruits had focused on more obvious threats and missed the real danger. This is exactly the kind of analytical thinking that separates competent snipers from exceptional ones, Vasquez told the group. But Maria's greatest challenge came during the long-range precision shooting tests. These exercises pushed shooting skills far beyond anything the recruits had encountered before. Targets at 800, 1,000, even 1,200 yards in varying weather conditions, different times of day, and with environmental factors that changed constantly. The first time recruits attempted shots beyond 1,000 yards, several experienced a form of performance anxiety that completely destroyed their accuracy. Chen, who had been one of the most consistent shooters at shorter ranges, couldn't hit a target the size of a garage door at 1,000 yards. The distance seemed to overwhelm his confidence and mess with his mental calculations. Maria approached extreme, long-range shooting with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. She spent extra time studying wind patterns, learning to read environmental conditions that weren't immediately obvious. While others rushed their shots, she took extensive notes on how different atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectory. "Santos," Vasquez called during one particularly challenging exercise. "You're up. Target at 1,200 yards, crosswind gusting to 20 miles per hour. and the light is changing as clouds move across the sun. This was the kind of shot that professional snipers might encounter in combat, requiring not just accuracy, but the ability to adapt to changing conditions in real time. Maria settled into her shooting position and began her pre-shot routine. She observed the wind flags at different distances, noting how the wind patterns changed between her position and the target. She watched the movement of grass and leaves, building a mental map of air currents across the entire trajectory path. Other recruits watched nervously. Several had already attempted this shot and failed spectacularly. The combination of distance, wind, and changing light conditions made it nearly impossible for anyone without extensive experience. Even Vasquez looked skeptical as Maria made her final adjustments. The shot rang out across the range, followed by a long silence as everyone waited for the spotter to announce the result. Direct hit, came the call. Dead center. The other recruits stared in amazement. Even the instructors seemed surprised by the precision of the shot under such difficult conditions. "How?" asked Thompson, a former police officer who had been struggling with long-range work. "I can barely see the target at that distance, let alone hit it consistently." Maria lowered her rifle and turned to face the group. "It's not about seeing the target clearly," she explained. "It's about understanding everything between you and the target. Wind, humidity, temperature, altitude, even the rotation of the Earth at these distances. You have to think of your bullet as traveling through a three-dimensional environment that's constantly changing." She demonstrated by walking through her mental checklist, explaining how she calculated adjustments for each environmental factor. What amazed the other recruits wasn't just her accuracy, but her ability to articulate the complex physics and environmental considerations that went into each shot. Vasquez pulled Maria aside after the exercise. "I've been training snipers for 8 years, she said quietly. "I've seen maybe 3 or 4 people with your natural ability to read conditions and adapt to them. You're not just a good shooter. You're thinking like a professional sniper." The piper compliment meant more to Maria than any praise she had received during training. Coming from someone with Vasquez's combat experience and reputation, it validated all the work she had put into mastering her craft. But it also carried weight of responsibility. With great skill came great expectations, and Maria knew that her performance was being scrutinized more closely than anyone else's. As the advanced training phase neared its end, the remaining recruits faced their final challenge, a comprehensive field exercise that would test every skill they had learned. They would be evaluated on shooting accuracy, tactical decision-making, intelligence gathering, and their ability to operate independently under combat conditions. Maria felt ready for whatever challenge awaited, but she also knew that her fellow recruits were watching her closely. She had become the unofficial standard by which others measured themselves, and that pressure was both motivating and nerve-wracking. The final test would determine not just who graduated from the program, but who would be recommended for the most challenging assignments in active combat zones. The final exercise was designed to simulate real combat conditions as closely as possible, without actual enemy fire. 12 recruits remained from the original 24, and each would be tested individually on their ability to complete a complex mission requiring all the skills they had learned during months of intensive training. "Operation Mountain Thunder," Vasquez announced as she briefed the remaining recruits. "Each of you will be inserted into a 20-square-mile area of hostile territory. Your mission is to locate and neutralize 12 specific targets within a 72-hour window. The targets are experienced soldiers acting as enemy combatants, and they know you're coming." She continued explaining the rules. Each recruit would be equipped with a sniper rifle loaded with paint ammunition that would leave bright marks when targets were hit. The enemy combatants carried sensors that would register successful hits and immediately remove them from the exercise. But there was a catch. The targets could also eliminate the recruits if they detected them before being shot. "This is not a game," Rodriguez added sternly. "The enemy force includes former special operations personnel, experienced hunters, and combat veterans. They have orders to make this as realistic and challenging as possible. Some of you will fail within the first few hours. Others might complete part of the mission before being detected. Very few will successfully eliminate all 12 targets." The pressure was intense, Everyone knew this exercise would determine their final rankings and future assignments. High performers would be fast-tracked to elite units and combat deployments. Those who struggled might find themselves reassigned to conventional infantry roles or washed out of the program entirely. Maria drew her insertion point and studied the topographical maps carefully. Her area included dense forest, rocky terrain, and a small village where several targets were reportedly operating. The challenging landscape would provide excellent concealment opportunities, but it would also make movement slow and difficult. She was inserted by helicopter at dawn on a Monday morning, carrying everything she would need for the 3-day exercise: rifle, ammunition, food, water, communication equipment, and survival gear. As the helicopter disappeared over the horizon, Maria felt the familiar sensation of being completely alone in hostile territory. Her first priority was finding a secure base camp where she could plan her approach and rest between operations. Maria chose a location that offered multiple escape routes and good visibility of the surrounding terrain. She spent the first few hours studying the area through her rifle scope, identifying likely patrol routes and defensive positions. The first target presented itself sooner than expected. Through her scope, Maria spotted a figure moving along a ridgeline about 600 yards away. The person was dressed in military gear and carrying what appeared to be an assault rifle. Everything about the individual's movement patterns suggested this was one of her assigned targets rather than a random actor. Maria studied the target's behavior for 30 minutes, noting the regular patrol pattern and identifying the best shooting position. The target was moving predictably, stopping at the same observation points every 12 minutes. This kind of routine behavior was exactly the type of mistake that got real soldiers killed in combat situations. She moved carefully to a new position. That would give her a clear shot when the target reached the next checkpoint. The stalk took 45 minutes of slow, deliberate movement through thick underbrush. Maria had to time her movements to avoid detection, freezing completely whenever the target looked in her direction. When the target reached the predicted position, Maria was ready. The paint round struck center mass and the target's sensors immediately registered a successful hit. Target 1 eliminated, came the radio confirmation. Maria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before beginning to plan her approach to the second target. The next 6 eliminations went smoothly. Maria demonstrated all the skills that had made her stand out during training: patience, precision shooting, tactical movement, and the ability to read enemy behavior patterns. Each successful hit boosted her confidence and confirmed that she belonged in this elite program. But the